Good afternoon and welcome to the return of Stewarts Soundbites. This is the first episode in the next series of Soundbites for the remainder of the year. There'll be a different host from the injury department across the next few months. I'm Chris Smith. I'm one of the partners in the personal injury team in Leeds, and it's my pleasure to be joined today by Alan McDougall, who is a prosthetist and the clinical director of Proactive Prosthetics. So Alan and I are going to be talking this afternoon about the sports opportunities available for amputees. We've got 15 minutes, so not very long, so we'll get straight into it. So thanks for joining us this afternoon, Alan. Wondering if you could tell me a bit about what sports and specifically sports prosthetics are available for amputees.
Yeah, it's quite a wide question, because I think these days there's loads of stuff which is really good. So when we talk about sports and amputations, it's dead easy to go straight down running, because that's what we've seen with a lot of Paralympic athletes. Everyone knows what a running blade looks like, and don't get me wrong, a lot of our patients will receive running blades and they'll learn how to use them. But for me, that's just a sport, and that's it. It's for me, it's what kind of devices can we provide people that gets them back into sport. And I think this is a real key bit about rehabilitation in a whole. So when we start with patients, they'll just be getting up on their leg to start off with, to walk. That's a real key goal. They'll be getting back to driving. That's another really good one. They'll be hopefully getting back to work. But I just feel like a real nice end goal to be that is to get back into sport. I'm quite passionate about sport. I like my sports mountain biking, and that's what that's what I do to keep myself fit, keep myself sane at some points in time. And I think to allow patients to get back to that and give them that kind of fitness is really important, especially when we know amputees use more energy to get about for the day-to-day living. So actually having a good level of fitness will really help them in the rest of their rehab and the rest of their life. So yeah, it's really important. So the kind of things we'd be looking at is all sorts of stuff, like getting people back into cycling. That's a nice easy one, because it's not high impact like running would be. We've recently made somebody a specific leg for climbing, which is really allowed them. That's a fairly standard socket, but actually a really short little foot on the end of it, and it just allows them to get closer into the wall and lever themselves up a climbing wall a little bit easier. So yeah, there's so much different stuff that people are able to do. And then we look at it and you think, well, we're talking about lower limb at this point in time. We also treat a lot of patients with upper limb, and getting them back into some kind of sport can be it can be quite challenging and interesting. Recently, I've been working with a guy who is an above elbow amputee, and his passion before his injury was cycling, but it was all sorts of cycling. He showed me a picture of his garage with these 16 different bikes that he had. So getting him really something really specific that allows him to cycle his bike at that sort of high level and have the right control of it has been really important. And we've got a new sort of project with him where we're going to have a shock in the elbow to allow him to mountain bike again. So yeah, there's loads of different things that we can do when it comes to sport.
And do you find that people want to get back to sports that they were doing pre-injury, or do you get a number of people that are looking at different sports as well?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff that people want to get back to pre-injury. And I think it's common when we see people they've had their injury, right? I want to get back to this thing I had a passion for, and that's really important. Not everyone that's had an injury has a sport that they like to do from beforehand. A good example of this is a guy that I treated years and years ago, and I didn't treat him as a new amputee. He was about 6 years in, and I was making him a new leg. And this guy was a personal instructor at a gym. He was ripped. He was just one of these guys. He was a man mountain. And I got talking to him. I was like, "Oh, so how did you find your rehab and having to get back into the training and stuff like that?" And he said, "Oh, no. Before my amputation, he was like, I was overweight and sat and played video games all the time." And I was like, oh, interesting. He went, it wasn't until I was doing my rehab that I got the bug for actually going to the gym and looking after myself. And that's now led him into his, new career as a personal instructor. So yeah, there's lots of different ways. I think as a rehab provider, it's really important that we can actually discuss with patients, about potential sports that they could do now they are an amputee. So again, running is something that we've got lots of patients that run, but actually the impact on a patient's stump is quite high when running. So not everyone's able to run as an amputee. So sometimes it's looking for a different sport for them to get into, or just a sport in general, which I always think is the interesting one. So a good example of that was I was helping out at the Limb Power Games a few weekends ago. So Limb Power are a charity, do a lot of work with amputees, but they have a real sort of focus on getting amputees back into sport. And that day consisted of lots and lots of different sports that amputees could try out. So there was a badminton one. There was, I'm trying to think, they had some field sports like, sort of javelin and shot put. I was helping out on the cycling one, so we were getting people back up on a bike, which was really interesting because it was like there were some people that had been amputees for 5 or 6 years and had never ridden a bike before as an amputee, but just talking them through the right sort of process to get on a bike, giving them some advice of what they might need to look for in a leg, getting them back up there. So yeah, it was really good. So there's lots of stuff out there like that to. It's almost like you need to give a lot of things a try before you find the one that's for you when it comes to sport, isn't it?
And we've got the Olympics and the Paralympics coming up later this year, and then you've kind of spoken about the people that are just getting back into sport or into sport for the first time. How does the approach differ between your dad kicking a ball around in the park with their children, getting back into sport for the first time, and your Paralympic athlete preparing for the games in Paris?
No, it's a really interesting question. So at Proactive, we've treated quite a lot of Paralympic athletes over the years. And it's, is anyone an expert in this? It's a very niche thing, is to treat Paralympians. And I think what we've sort of learned over the years with treating people like, Richard Whitehead and Johnny Peacock and Steph Reed, gold medalists in their field, and when you look at it, these are top end athletes. So it's all about marginal gains. If you're running 100 meters, it's tenths of seconds, hundreds of seconds that can make the difference between first and second. So you treat fitting their leg with the marginal gains. So there's a lot of time that's involved at that point in time of just trying different things out. We've luckily had the opportunity to work with one of the prosthetic product providers, Osser, who make a lot of the running blades. We've had the opportunity to go over to their sort of test lab over in Iceland with a couple of the amputees to test out lots of different blades, lots of different shapes, and it's not, none of them are making dramatic difference. It's making that small marginal gain. And I think personally, to me, as a prosthetist, that's probably affected how I treat patients day to day, as well as, the patients doing more sort of recreational sports, because it is, those marginal gains are still there for everyone else. Do you quickly get a leg ready for somebody and it's functioning at 90%, or do you spend the next hour tweaking it and get it to 100%? And that, that next hour of getting that extra 10% out is well worth it. And it can just, it's the difference between somebody having the confidence to get back into sport, or, them just going, oh, this leg's niggling me a little bit, and then it sits in the cupboard and they don't use it.
So it's not just your difference between silver and gold, it's the difference between being able to get into the park with your children or not.
100%. And I think, it's just important as a clinician to treat these things with the same respect. It's all well and good, and it's, it's interesting treating an athlete that gets to and wins a gold medal, and you think, wow, do you know what, I helped out in that? That was really good. But equally as rewarding is, helping somebody, as you said, like, be able to play a game of football with their children and their grandkids, and they come back in buzzing the next day into clinic going, oh, I was able to do this, which I wasn't able to do before. Those kind of things for me as a clinician are as satisfying as each other, so.
And in terms of the access to sports prosthetics, in an ideal world, every amputee is going to have access to sports prosthetics. But if we look at the people that perhaps don't have a personal injury claim or don't have access to interim funding, or how easy is it to access sports prosthetics?
There's a couple of different routes. I would say so. A lot of these people will be accessing the NHS for their limbs. There's good NHS funding for under 18s, so children, for running blades and sports prosthetics. And I think that's been in place for must be 9-10 years or something like that now.
Yeah.
And that's fairly well accessed. The set problem with that is when they turn 18. Then
that was the question I was just going to ask you. Does that stop at 18?
Yeah, I think some NHS trusts will actually look at these individually and go, that's pretty hard to take a running blade away from somebody, and they might have some kind of exceptional funding to carry on, that, which I think is really important, but it's not guaranteed at that point in time. If there was somebody, who was an amputee who was over 18 who wanted to access sports, then I think generally through most of the NHS services, it is quite difficult to get a sports specific leg. There's charities that you can access through. So we have, over the years and recently at the moment, we've worked with the Richard Whitehead Foundation. So Richard is a Paralympic athlete that we've treated for a number of years now. He has set up his own foundation, and the part of this foundation is to work with amputees and try and mentor them and try and get them to a better place, in their life. And it's not just all about sport, but obviously there is a big focus on sport, being a sportsman himself. So recently they have a few patients every year that they will fund some prosthetic limbs for, to get them back into sport. So a couple of years ago, we had a couple down at Proactive that we ended up making them some running legs and allowing them to get back to a little bit of jogging. And we've got two more patients in at the moment, and we're looking at getting them into not just jogging, but I think one of them's want to get into racket sport. So there's a couple of these charities that people can access, which I think is really important. And obviously, with something like this being run by somebody like Richard Whitehead, he knows what sport can mean to people and what gets into it and stuff like that. So, he's fairly phenomenal. I don't know if you saw it online over the weekend, but he was running the London Marathon. So originally, years ago, Richard was a long distance runner. That was his sport. It's not in the Paralympics. As a Paralympic sport, long distance running is not there. It's only the track events really in the Paralympics. So Richard made the switch over to track, was very successful at track, and has since, I think, with Paralympics, the categories change, and some of the events sort of are in some games, but not others. So his 200-meter event's not actually in Paris anymore. So he decided to move away from the track, and he's recently got back into his marathon running. So at the London Marathon the weekend there, he set a new Guinness World Record for a bilateral amputee running a marathon, and his time was 2 hours, 42 minutes and 1 second.
That's just remarkable, isn't it?
It's crazy. It's crazy. And Richard's not a young man himself anymore, so I think there's a lot to go in there. But I think having something like that, from a charity point of view, an advocate that really understands it, is really important. But there's all sorts of other charities we worked with in the past as well. We definitely had a sports limb funded through Blesma, which is for ex-servicemen. So, having some different things like that funded for some people. So, there's lots of different avenues, and it's definitely talking to some of these charities and looking at it like that, and then seeing if, somebody privately can fund these. The other thing to look at is actually the cost of a sports leg probably isn't as high as you would think. People always think, well, a sports leg must be really fancy. It's probably one of the most expensive prosthetic legs you can get. But the technology that goes into, some of these running blades it's quite simple. It's a carbon blade. It's a C-shaped carbon blade that bends and, and then releases the energy. Whereas actually walking legs can be a lot more complicated because they might have hydraulic ankles in them. They might have microprocessors in them. torsion units. So actually, you tend to find that actually making somebody a sports leg can actually be a little bit cheaper than making them their everyday leg. So prosthetics is expensive, so I'm not saying it's accessible to everyone, but it's sometimes worth that conversation with a private company just to see how much these things would cost.
And you don't just get the physical, you get the mental benefits of getting somebody back in sport as well.
Yeah, 100%. I think that for me, that is the biggest bit. There's the physical benefits, but it's the mental health benefits just are massive, isn't it? I think for me, sport allows me to probably be a little bit less stressed, a little bit calmer, which probably makes me better at work, a better dad. It's definitely a big thing to think about.
Excellent. Well, we're through our 15 minutes already. That's been a really great session, Alan. Thanks for sharing that with us. We're going to share some information on the charities that Alan's mentioned at the end with the recording. And thanks very much for your time today, Alan. And please keep your eyes open for the advert for the next session.
Yep. No, thanks. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, Alan. Thanks, everybody.
See you later. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.